The warp storm had no beginning and no mercy, a swirling wound in the void that tore at the fabric of reality with slow, grinding hunger. Within its depths, time faltered, memory unraveled, and entire worlds were swallowed without a sound. Valeria IX hung beneath this cosmic maelstrom like a candle beneath a hurricane, its hive cities trembling as the storm pressed against the atmosphere with the weight of an ancient curse. Before we descend into the chaos of this tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more legends and dark histories from the Warhammer 40K universe. From the heart of the storm came a single falling shape, small against the scale of celestial ruin, yet heavy with an older darkness. The figure tumbled through fractured space, caught in violent currents that dragged him across dying stars and forgotten ages. Twisted arcs of shadow clung to him like tattered banners, remnants of a corruption not born of the warp, but something colder and deeper, born from a place where light had long since failed. The descent ended in a shockwave of shattered stone and blackened dust. The ground cratered outward, sending ripples of broken ferrocrete across the abandoned Manufactorum plain. For a long moment, the crater lay silent except for the distant groan of collapsing machinery and the slow hiss of leaking steam lines. Even the wind held its breath as if fearful of disturbing whatever had arrived. From the center of the impact, the knight began to move. Armored plates scraped against debris as he lifted himself with a weary, strained motion. His left arm hung limp at his side, twisted by old suffering, yet his posture carried the unyielding weight of a warrior who had forgotten how to fall. The greatsword at his back dragged through the rubble, trailing a line of corrupted soot that pulsed faintly, responding to the faint heartbeat of the abyss within him. The air recoiled around him, not in the way it recoiled from demons or warp-born entities, but with a more ancient reluctance, as if the world remembered a wound similar to this darkness. Threads of black residue seeped from the knight's armor like a wounded shadow trying to reform itself, yet even this corruption seemed restrained, fighting to hold its shape in a universe it did not belong to. Artorias the Abysswalker stood at last upon foreign soil, breath steady, armor cracked, spirit scarred by battles no one here could understand. The distant hive towers flickered under red emergency lumens as warning sirens echoed across the plain, their wails merging with the silent pull of the warp storm above. Valeria IX felt his arrival, the way a haunted land senses the return of a long-buried legend. Nothing in this realm knew his name, yet the ground at his feet recognized the echo of a warrior who had once challenged darkness itself. A low pulse of static rolled through the Manufactorum ruins, drifting outward like a whisper carried on the ash-choked wind. It was not a greeting nor a warning, but the trembling breath of a world that sensed the first shift of a coming storm. The knight lifted his head toward the bloodlit sky, the abyss flickering along the edges of his vision, and the void answered with distant thunder. A new battlefront waited before him, vast and merciless, shaped by powers he had never known. Yet the rhythm of war was familiar, steady as the beat of a broken heart. The Abysswalker took his first step into the 41st millennium, and the world braced itself for what his shadow would bring. Valeria IX lay beneath the churning warp storm like a wounded titan, its surface a patchwork of hive spires, rusted manufactorums, and polluted plains long surrendered to industry. The world had once served as a vital anchor in its sector, a place where weapons, armor plates, and armored transport shells poured endlessly from forge lines that never slept. Now those lines flickered and groaned under failing power grids, their machine spirits trembling in fear as the storm above pressed down with unnatural weight. Hive-Talion dominated the horizon, a mountain of metal and stone rising from a wasteland of spent slag and skeletal infrastructure. Its outer walls were scorched by recent bombardments, each wound a testament to the relentless war against the forces clawing at its gates. Great chimneys belched smoke clouds that merged with the storm's bleeding swirl, giving the sky a permanent shade of bruised dark red. Every surface was layered in industrial dust, fine as ash and bitter as forgotten prayers. Within the hive's shadow, the lower districts burned in scattered pockets. Chaos warbands had carved their symbols into hab blocks and transit stations, twisting the layout into mazes of fear and ruin. Panicked citizens fled through broken streets while Imperial loudspeakers stuttered orders for evacuation and shelter, their messages swallowed by the roar of distant artillery. Even the air tasted strained, thick with smoke, metal shavings, and the faint static of warp interference. Above the chaos, defense platforms blinked erratically. Their auspex arrays struggled to see through the storm, showing fractured readings that shifted from friendly signatures to impossible distortions. Tech priests chanted desperately over failing cogitators, trying to appease agitated machine spirits as systems flickered between life and death. The storm distorted everything it touched, bending space and time with calm cruelty. In the upper reaches of Hive Talion, the command bastion held fast behind heavy fortifications. Colonel Mercian surveyed the situation from dim tactical displays, each screen showing another district slipping into fire and confusion. Vox channels crackled with overlapping calls for reinforcements, each more frantic than the last. The storm had cut their astropathic relays, leaving Valyria IX blind and alone, unable to summon help from the wider Imperium. The planet endured, but each hour carved deeper fractures into its will. Far beyond the hive walls, the Manufactorum plains where the night had fallen stretched in silent desolation. Conveyor belts lay frozen mid-cycle, their cargo of half-forged warplate abandoned beneath emergency lumens that flickered like dying stars. No workers remained, no servitors stirred. Only the distant thump of artillery broke the stillness, the sound traveling across open ground like a heartbeat fading into the dark. This world, battered and breathless, recognized the arrival of something foreign. Not a demon, not a Xenos, but another wound added to the many etched into its surface. Valyria IX had seen centuries of war, but the shadow now walking its soil carried a different weight, cold, ancient, shaped by struggles distant from the Imperium yet eerily familiar in their tragedy. As the night's presence spread, the warp storm above shifted in subtle ways, as if adjusting to a new variable it had not anticipated. Machine spirits whispered their unease. Human hearts felt a tremor of recognition they could not name. The land itself seemed to draw a long, weary breath. Valyria IX was a world accustomed to suffering, but now it felt the first stirrings of a story not its own. And in that uneasy space, between ruin and myth, the planet waited to see whether this fallen warrior would bring salvation, damnation, or another shadow in a galaxy already drowning in them. The first ripples of Artorias' presence moved across the plains in quiet, unseen waves. They slid through broken pipelines and shattered ferrocrete, drifting beneath rusted conveyor tracks like a whisper beneath the earth. To the untrained eye, nothing changed. To Valyria IX, the shift was unmistakable, a faint tremor in the deep places where old wounds of the planet never fully healed. The abyss seeped outward slowly, restrained by the night's fractured will. Shadows pooled in the cracks of shattered machinery, thickening in corners untouched by the hive's flickering light. Black motes drifted through the air like ash, weightless and without source. They clung to twisted rebar, sank into dormant servitor sockets, and curled around broken ammunition crates as though searching for something familiar. Yet the corruption did not spread with the hungry chaos of the warp. It drifted with cautious, wounded intent, as if unsure of its place in this alien realm. A lone servoskull drifted across the Manufactorum approach, servos whining with fatigue. It passed above the impact crater, attempting to continue its patrol route. The moment its lumen eyes touched the night below, its machine spirit convulsed. Static poured from its Vox emitter as the skull jerked violently sideways, spiraling to the ground with a spark of disrupted logic. Its fall echoed across the plain, a faint metallic cry swallowed quickly by the growing silence. Further up the slope, sensors buried deep beneath the soil flickered awake. Cogitators recorded readings they could not categorize, darkness without warp resonance, pressure without mass, movement without form. Data feeds sputtered and self-corrected in frantic loops, unable to process what approached them. One by one, the arrays shut down, retreating into protective stasis as though seeking to shield themselves from something their logic could not withstand. Across the plain, the shadows grew denser in places where no light should have failed. They curled around the remains of assembly cranes and pooled beneath rusted tracks, moving with the slow pulse of something alive. Where the darkness thickened, sound softened. The distant rumble of artillery became muted, the crackle of power lines hushed. Even the wind hesitated, brushing past the edges of the abyssal presence with uneasy restraint. Artorias stood at the center of this quiet upheaval, unmoving, shoulders rising and falling with controlled breaths. The abyss leaked from his armor in faint, rhythmic pulses, responding to the dull ache within his corrupted soul. The universe around him felt unfamiliar, heavy with mechanical coldness and the bitter scent of unending war. Yet beneath that harsh exterior, something stirred in recognition. It was not comfort, but kinship between wounded worlds, both bearing the memory of endless struggle. As he stepped forward, a soft tremor rolled through the Manufactorum foundations. Machinery long dormant shuddered at his passing, gears shifting as though disturbed by a phantom touch. Even broken servitors twitched, optical lenses flickering once before sinking back into lifeless stillness. Every motion he made carried an echo of his past battles, the abyss weaving subtle patterns across the ground without conscious command. To the Imperials watching from distant vantage points, the anomaly took shape in scattered reports. Auspex operators whispered of shadow readings that moved without heat signatures. Vox officers spoke of interference patterns trailing across open channels. Tech adepts prayed over glitching runes, as systems insisted something was walking the plains that did not belong to the warp nor the known flesh of any catalogued species. The planet itself seemed to recoil and lean forward at once, caught between dread and curiosity. Valeria IX had endured the corruption of chaos, the predations of Xenos, and the upheavals of human rebellion. Yet the darkness now touching its soil felt older, quieter, burdened not with ambition, but with sorrow sharpened into purpose. As the night advanced across the fractured plain, the abyss moved with him in a slow, haunting rhythm. And somewhere in the distant hive spires, the Imperium's defenders felt an unfamiliar chill as the first signs of an unknown shadow entered their war-torn world, settling softly into the cracks of a galaxy already fraying at its edges. Dust settled slowly over the crater as the knight pushed himself upright, armor groaning under the strain of old wounds and unfamiliar gravity. The abyss trembled along the edges of his vision, a muted throb that pulsed with every slowed heartbeat. His senses reached outward, searching for the distant echoes of a world he once knew, but nothing answered. No scent of Oolacile's twisted woods, no murmur of Sif's footsteps, only the hollow clang of dead machinery struggling beneath the weight of a dying sky. The ruined plain around him breathed faint heat from fractured pipelines and exposed power conduits. Pale emergency lumens flickered in the distance like fading fireflies, guiding no one. Artorias steadied himself, leaning briefly on his greatsword's hilt as the abyss inside him recoiled from the world's metallic coldness. His broken arm hung motionless, a permanent reminder of a battle that still echoed inside his bones. Yet his stance held the quiet resilience of a warrior who rose out of habit, shaped by duty older than memory. He scanned the horizon with a calm, heavy stillness, absorbing the unfamiliar mechanics of this new realm. A world defined by steel and smoke offered no comfort, but something deep within him recognized the same pressure of unending war. His breathing settled into a battle rhythm, slow and steady. Every motion stirred faint trails of black residue that drifted behind him before dissolving into dust. As he took his first measured step toward the distant hive towers, the land seemed to lean away, bracing for the passage of a knight who carried darkness like a wounded oath. The world did not know him, yet it felt the story carved into his armor, and the path before him began to take shape with solemn inevitability. The Manufactorum outskirts had drawn a scouting patrol from Hive Talion, a small group of guardsmen moving with the tense precision of soldiers far too accustomed to bad omens. Their boots crunched through broken ferrocrete as they advanced behind rusted cargo haulers, lasguns held close, helmets ticking with faint vox static caused by the storm overhead. Every shadow felt stretched and uncertain, clinging to machinery as if afraid to let go. They found the crater rim first, freshly shattered stone, heat still clinging to the edges, and a trail of dark residue leading away from the impact site. The squad halted with uneasy coordination, scanning for demonic shapes or corrupted silhouettes. Nothing in their manuals prepared them for the figure who waited beyond the drifting dust. The knight stood motionless between warp support beams, silhouette tall and gaunt beneath battered armor marked by battles older than the Imperium itself. No insignia matched their records. No movement betrayed hostility, yet the air around him carried a quiet ache that set every instinct on edge. One guardsman muttered a quiet prayer under his breath, steadying trembling hands as his visor tried to lock onto the stranger's form and failed. Artorias turned slightly at their approach. He did not raise his weapon nor acknowledge their fear with aggression. His presence alone was enough to silence their vox line, forcing the squad to face him without the comfort of command guidance. The knight's posture, though burdened by past corruption, held a strange dignity that held them in place. Between warrior and soldiers stretched a moment of fragile stillness, the plains around them dimming as the warp storm's clouds thickened overhead. Valeria IX exhaled quietly, sensing the first threads of a story binding these two forces together in ways none of them understood. Artorias took one step forward, and the guardsmen tightened their formation, unsure whether they faced salvation or the beginning of another nightmare. The standoff fractured with the distant rumble of boots and broken chanting rolling across the Manufactorum debris. Chaos Cultists emerged from the jagged ruins like carrion feeders drawn by the scent of a fresh wound. Their bodies twisted by devotion, their voices warped by the storm, they surged toward the crater with crude blades and stolen rifles held high. Red lumens glimmered on their rusted symbols, flickering like embers in a furnace. The guardsmen turned instinctively to meet the threat, but the cultists moved in numbers that far outmatched a simple patrol. Their roars drowned out the last order crackling through damaged Vox units. In that rising chaos, the knight shifted his stance with a quiet certainty. The abyss pulsed at his feet, settling into him like ink returning to a familiar well. Without warning, he moved. Artorias lunged forward with a speed that broke the rhythm of the battlefield. His greatsword swung in wide, controlled arcs, each blow carrying the weight of countless battles fought in forgotten realms. Cultists fell before they understood what stood among them. Metal screamed, bones shattered, and the corrupted earth trembled beneath the force of his strikes. The abyss flickered with each swing, forming faint trails of shadow that dissolved as quickly as they appeared. The guardsmen watched in stunned silence as the knight carved a path through enemies that would have overwhelmed them in minutes. No roar of triumph came from him, no signal for aid or praise. Only the steady rhythm of purpose carried him forward, cutting down the last fanatic with a single, decisive blow. The battlefield quieted once more, save for the hiss of ruptured pipes and the crackle of distant fires. The patrol lowered their weapons, unsure whether to approach or retreat. The knight did not turn toward them immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the direction from which the cultists had come, sensing deeper tremors spreading across the plains. Something else was stirring in the storm's shadow, drawn toward him with dangerous intent. The aftermath settled over the plains with a charged stillness. The guardsmen approached cautiously, their steps hesitant, breaths held behind helmet filters as they tried to process the battle they had just witnessed. Nothing in the Imperium's vast records held a figure like the knight who now stood among the bodies, his armor streaked with dark residue that pulsed weakly, refusing to evaporate like warp-borne filth. One soldier ran Auspex diagnostics twice, then a third time, unable to reconcile readings that labeled the warrior as both living and unclassifiable. Another knelt beside a fallen cultist and traced the clean cut that had severed the body in a single stroke. No power sword or chain blade could have carved so smooth an edge. The man swallowed hard, whispering a prayer for clarity. Artorias did not understand their awe or their fear. He studied the fallen enemies with the same distant calm he had carried in Oolacile, searching for patterns of corruption that might reveal the nature of this world's darkness. Yet what he sensed felt disjointed, warped by forces different from the abyss. Their corruption was loud, chaotic, lacking the cold sorrow that clung to his own shadow. They were monsters of noise. He was a creature shaped by silence. The guardsmen attempted to form words, but the storm's low hum swallowed their efforts. Confusion spread among them like smoke, tempered only by the grim discipline drilled into every regiment of the Imperium. They held their ground not out of courage, but because their training left them no other choice. They knew only one truth: the stranger had saved their lives, yet his presence troubled every instinct they possessed. From the distant hive walls, sensors continued to fail. Vox channels dipped into static. Commanding officers demanded updates that came in broken pieces. What reached them were fragments, spoken with shaking voices, a night knot of the warp, a warrior with a blade forged from forgotten sorrows, a being who cut through corruption with unnatural precision. The world paused, waiting for what this anomaly would bring next, and as the silence deepened, a darker ripple began to push through the ruins, heralding the next shadow that sought the knight's attention. The air grew heavy, thickening with a pressure that pressed on armor and bone alike. Even the dust rising from the battlefield shifted unnaturally, curling back toward the ruins as though refusing to drift into the direction of the approaching threat. The guardsmen stiffened, sensing corruption long before its forms became visible. Their visors filled with distorted symbols and static lines as their auspex struggled to trace movements that refused logical classification. Artorias felt the disturbance in a deeper way, through the echoing pull of the abyss inside him. It recoiled and expanded simultaneously, recognizing a familiar hunger yet rejecting its chaotic, uncontrolled nature. The knight's stance tightened, blade lowering to his side, its tip carving a faint groove into the cracked ground. The pulse of his inner darkness steadied, ready to meet what came. From the shattered manufactorum doors emerged shapes that defied both anatomy and sanity. Chaos twisted them into writhing masses of fused limbs, screaming maws, and rusted metal embedded in flesh. Warp energy bled from their forms like poison mist. Their presence warped the air around them, casting flickering shadows that bent away from the Abysswalker as they advanced. The guardsmen faltered. These were horrors meant to break regiments, not a scattered patrol. Their lasguns trembled in their hands as the creatures surged forward with frantic speed, driven by the storm's pulsing rhythm. Artorias moved to intercept with a calm certainty, his corrupted greatsword rising to meet the first misshapen attacker. The abyss flared with controlled intensity, shaping itself around the knight's movements not as a master, but as a wounded companion drawn to his will. Every motion he made struck with the force of a warrior, forged in tragedies these creatures could never comprehend. The manufactorum plain shook with the first clash. Shadows thickened around the combatants, swirling in slow spirals that mirrored the storm above. The creatures screeched as the knight's blade cut through corrupted limbs and twisted hides. Each strike released bursts of stagnant energy that dissipated harmlessly in the air, their connection to the warp resisting the abyss for only a heartbeat before collapsing. Behind the knight, the guardsmen rallied, their fear momentarily softened by the sheer presence of a warrior who faced nightmares with unbroken resolve. In their hearts, awe mingled with dread, and a single question formed quietly in every mind. What manner of being walked their world now, carrying darkness that fought corruption rather than fueling it? The last creature fell under a heavy, decisive blow. leaving the battlefield drenched in the unnatural stench of warp-mutated flesh. Artorias stood amidst the remains, the abyss pulsing around him with a low, steady rhythm, as though acknowledging the presence of a rival corruption it had momentarily silenced. The storm rumbled overhead, sensing the clash of two ancient darknesses, and somewhere deep within the hive city, darker eyes watched the anomaly with growing interest, marking the night as a threat, a weapon, or a herald of calamities yet to unfold. The Manufactorum plain had barely settled from the last clash when the ground beneath Artorias shuddered with a deeper, heavier tremor. Dust drifted upward in thin spirals as pipes cracked open beneath the strain, releasing gouts of steam that ghosted across the ruins like pale spirits fleeing some unseen terror. The guardsmen tightened their formation, but even their discipline trembled beneath the weight of the presence that began to approach. Something larger than the twisted mutants lurked in the dark, something shaped by the warp with crude, brutal purpose. The air thickened with a metallic scent, sharp and feverish. Shapes lumbered from between fractured pillars, massive forms twisted by corruption that defied any natural anatomy. Chaos spawn, hulking abominations molded from mortals who had been reshaped by madness and warp influence until only instinct and agony remained. Their bodies pulsed beneath layers of slick, shifting flesh, limbs sprouting at unnatural angles, mouths opening where no mouths should be. Their roars echoed through the ruins, low and distorted, resonating like broken machinery being forced to life. Artorias sensed them before they emerged fully, the abyss quivering along the edges of his awareness. Their corruption felt wrong to him, loud and chaotic, lacking the somber weight of the darkness he knew. His abyss was sorrow wielded as strength. The warp corruption within these creatures was madness sharpened by violence. Yet both shadows recognized one another with cold hostility, two worlds of darkness colliding on ground that had forgotten peace long ago. With steady certainty, Artorias lowered his stance, greatsword dragging lightly across the ground, tracing a thin line through the dust. Shadows curled around his blade, responding to the slow rhythm of his breath. The first chaos spawn lunged with a sudden, staggering burst of speed, limbs flailing in chaotic arcs. Artorias pivoted sharply, weight shifting with practiced grace despite the cracked armor and ruined arm. His sword cut upward in a clean, brutal arc, severing a cluster of writhing limbs and sending chunks of corrupted flesh scattering across the plain. Another spawn barreled in from the right, its torso splitting down the center to reveal rows of teeth snapping hungrily. Artorias rolled beneath its strike, moving with the fractured agility that had defined his legendary battles. His movements were not smooth. They carried the unsettled rhythm of a knight who had fought too long against impossible odds, whose body remembered pain even when the mind remained focused. Rising from the roll, he drove his blade through the creature's side, the abyss erupting in a pulse that spread through its body like cold fire. The spawn convulsed as its corrupted structure dissolved under the pressure of a darkness it could not withstand. The third spawn circled behind him, attempting to flank with instinctive, desperate cunning. Artorias did not turn. The abyss warned him in its own silent language, stirring the air around him in a faint tremor. With a swift backstep, he brought his blade down in a punishing overhead strike, cleaving the abomination from shoulder to hip. Its dying screech echoed across the Manufactorum plain before collapsing into a mess of steaming flesh. Silence returned gradually, settling over the ruin like a heavy blanket. The corpses of the chaos spawn twitched briefly before going still, their corrupted forms collapsing inward as though the world itself rejected them. Artorias stood amidst the aftermath, chest rising steadily, greatsword dripping with remnants of warp-tainted matter. The abyss coiled around him with restrained agitation, responding to the presence of a rival darkness now cut short. The guardsmen, watching from a cautious distance, found themselves frozen between fear and wonder. None of them had seen a single warrior stand alone against such beasts and remain unbroken. Their breath came shallowly as they realized that whatever this knight was, he carried a storm with him that rivaled the tempest raging in the sky above. The land grew still once more, holding its breath as Artorias lifted his gaze toward the distant hive, sensing that these were only the first shadows sent to test him. Something deeper, more calculating, was already watching. High above the Manufactorum plain, perched upon a rusted gantry that overlooked the battlefield with the quiet patience of ancient machinery, a tech priest studied the scene with widening fascination. His mechadendrites clicked and adjusted with restless energy, each equipped with auspex lenses and scanning arrays that glowed with flickering data runes. The figure below, moving with the disciplined savagery of a seasoned warrior, did not fit within the narrow schema of anything known to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Binary prayers whispered through the tech priest's vox grill as he watched. His sensors attempted to categorize the knight's presence, but every reading returned contradictions. The armored figure emitted no warp signature, yet the darkness around him behaved like a corruption without source. His blade carried no power field, yet it cut through matter with the efficiency of a relic weapon. His movements possessed a speed bordering on post-human agility, yet his physiology did not conform to any catalogued subspecies. The tech priest rerouted power to secondary scanners. His eyes glowed a brighter red as he magnified the image. He observed the fractured armor, a design of unknown origin bearing motifs that evoked both nobility and sorrow. Strange markings etched along the plating flickered faintly as though responding to unseen forces. The broken arm, left hanging useless, displayed no augmentation, yet the warrior fought with alarming fluidity, compensating for the injury with instinct honed through battles far removed from imperial experience. His mechadendrites sampled the residue left in the knight's wake. The dark motes clinging to the ground carried molecular instability, patterns similar to warp taint, yet the energy did not resonate with the Imperium. Instead, it behaved like a separate darkness, one that resisted full penetration by scanning arrays. The tech priest recoiled internally at the implications. A corruption independent of the warp, moving through their world with sentience and intent, threatened every law of understanding the Mechanicus held sacred. As the knight dispatched the last of the Chaos spawn, the tech priest activated long-range Vox encryption, transmitting bursts of data to the nearest relay tower. Reports flowed through the channel, detailing the anomaly, non-warp darkness manifesting as controlled corruption, unknown warrior with relic-level weaponry, combat capabilities equal to or surpassing Astartes-level reflexes. His voice crackled through the network, flat and emotionless, yet beneath every binary chant lay a tremor of unease. In the depths of the hive's command bastion, officers received the tech priest's fragmented transmissions with growing alarm. His analysis painted a figure that could be tool, threat, or omen, but the priest watched with a different eye. His curiosity outweighed fear. Each data point hinted at a connection between the stranger and a darkness older than the warp, a possibility that the Imperium had encountered a shadow from a parallel reality, carrying remnants of a corruption untouched by chaos. The tech priest recorded every movement of the knight as he advanced across the plain, whispering data litanies to appease the machine spirits straining to classify the anomaly. Though he did not yet understand the significance of the figure below, one truth settled within him with cold precision. The Mechanicus would demand answers. The Inquisition would demand containment. And through the slow turn of his mechanical thoughts, he sensed that the knight's arrival was not a mere accident of the storm, but the first ripple of a greater disturbance that would force the Imperium to confront shadows beyond its known pantheon of horrors. Within the armored walls of Hive Talion's command bastion, the air carried the weight of constant stress. Cogitators hummed under the strain of overclocked processing units, tactical holodisplays flickered between districts in chaos, and Vox officers shouted for clarity through channels thick with static. Emergency lighting cast the room in shades of grim amber, illuminating the silhouettes of hardened officers who had weathered years of war. Yet even their stoic composure wavered as the latest reports filtered through the scrambled Vox. Colonel Mercian stood at the central command table, his eyes scanning over a flood of fractured data fragments relayed from the tech priest and scout patrols. Each fragment felt more unreal than the last, enemy forces behaving erratically, warp disturbances with no demonic signature, a solitary figure cutting through Chaos Cultists and mutated abominations with a weapon not registered in any Imperial archive. Mercian leaned forward, brow tense, absorbing every detail with the reluctance of a man who wished he could dismiss the information as battlefield myth. Images flickered across the hollow slate, a tall knight moving through shadows with fluid, broken speed, a blade cleaving through warped flesh with unyielding purpose, residue clinging to the ground in patterns that defied categorization. Mercian exhaled slowly, weighing the tactical implications. If the figure was a demon, it was unlike anything Chaos had unleashed before. If it was a Xenos, it demonstrated combat capabilities rivaling an Astartes. If it was something else entirely, the mystery deepened. Strategic officers murmured among themselves, voices low with tension. Some suspected a new Chaos mutation. Others whispered of a lost Imperial reliquarier awakened by the warp storm. A few invoked the Emperor's will, wondering if this night was a sign of divine intervention. Mercian shut down the speculation with a raised hand, focusing instead on actionable truths. Whatever walked the plains was powerful, disciplined, and currently targeting the enemies of the Imperium, not its defenders. Yet the anomaly posed risks no commander could ignore. If the entity turned its blade upon Imperial forces, the Hive's defenses would crumble before they could mount a coordinated response. Mercian issued urgent orders for containment protocols. Scouting parties were to observe the night from a distance. Vox channels were to monitor every shift in its movements. Mechanicus support teams were to analyze residue samples. No confrontation was to occur unless the stranger revealed hostile intent. A junior officer approached from the far corner of the room, clutching a strip of printed data. Her hands trembled slightly as she delivered the latest transmission intercepted from the Manufactorum outskirts. Mercian scanned the report, jaw tightening. The anomaly had just engaged and killed Chaos spawn, monstrosities that devoured entire squads of soldiers. The officer's voice wavered as she spoke of guardsmen standing in stunned silence, untouched by the carnage. The colonel felt the storm beyond the Hive pressing inward like a living weight. Valyria IX had endured sieges and heretical uprisings, but this new presence threatened to destabilize the fragile balance he fought to maintain. He lifted his gaze toward the distant Manufactorum district displayed on the tactical screen. Somewhere out there, a knight draped in shadows walked unfamiliar ground, carrying a darkness that did not belong to the warp. Command needed answers. The Inquisition would soon demand more. Mercian only hoped they could find the truth before the unknown warrior decided the Imperium was an enemy rather than an ally. When the sounds of battle faded, Artorias found himself drawn deeper into the silent heart of the Manufactorum ruins. The wind, thick with ash and metallic grit, brushed against his armor in uneven gusts, carrying faint echoes that did not belong to this world. He moved through twisted corridors of broken girders and shattered pipelines, each step disturbing dust that had settled for years. The shadows clinging to the walls swayed around him, responding to the slow pulse of the abyss that accompanied every breath he took. As he entered a collapsed assembly hall, the atmosphere shifted with subtle weight. The sprawling chamber, once home to colossal forging machines, stood in ruin. Broken servitors lay scattered like discarded dolls, their hollow lenses staring upward as if still awaiting orders. Conveyor belts sagged under melted supports. The far wall bore crude symbols carved in haste by heretical hands. Yet it was not the ruin nor the taint that drew the knight's attention. It was a deeper ache rising from within, a memory stirring like an old wound reopened. The abyss rippled behind his vision, dredging up fragments that bled into the present. A ruined city swallowed by shadow, a great wolf howling in defiance, the small hand of a frightened girl reaching through darkness, begging for salvation that came too late. The ground beneath him felt heavier as he remembered the final moments in Oolacile, a battle fought alone against a corruption he could not defeat. His left arm twitched involuntarily, the broken limb still bearing the toll of that sacrifice. The image of Sif flickered across his thoughts with painful clarity, the loyal companion standing over his fallen body in his final moments. In that memory, her eyes carried sorrow deeper than any abyss. Here, in this alien world, he listened for her soft footsteps, hoping against reason that her presence might pierce through the storm of unfamiliar corruption surrounding him. Only silence answered, filled with the quiet pulse of machinery struggling to breathe. He lowered himself to one knee, his weight shifting onto the greatsword balanced at his side. His shadow stretched long across the ruined floor, fractured and uneven like the memories rising within him. The pain of failure returned with undeniable force, yet beneath it remained the same unbroken resolve that defined him. Artorias had not fallen into despair, even at the height of his corruption. His will, tempered by agony, still burned as fiercely as ever. The abyss around him darkened for a heartbeat, responding to the swell of emotion flickering through his soul. It coiled around the base of his sword, stirring dust and debris lightly as if imitating the motions of a long-forgotten wind. The knight steadied his breath, reasserting command over the restless shadow. His control was imperfect, strained by the environment, yet his determination kept the corruption from consuming him fully. When he rose again, his movements were slow but certain. Memories remained heavy upon him, but they no longer threatened to collapse his resolve. This world held dangers he did not yet understand, and enemies he could not yet name, but its battlefields carried the same cold weight as those he had known before. Somewhere beyond the Manufactorum walls, deeper tremors rolled across the land, foretelling greater conflicts. Artorias adjusted his stance, feeling the ancient rhythm of duty settle into place. Sorrow did not weaken him, memory did not bind him. They shaped his steps with the same quiet severity that guided him through the abyss long ago. As he turned toward the distant hive, the storm overhead growled softly, acknowledging the resurgence of a knight who had once stood alone against impossible darkness. Here, in this foreign war, the Abysswalker prepared to meet whatever shadows this new world dared to send. The warp storm above Valyria IX swelled with new intensity, its vast spirals of crimson and void blue twisting in violent convulsions. Lightning arcs chased themselves across the roiling mass, illuminating the hive spires below in flashes of unnatural color. Citizens huddled in their shelters felt the shift before any alarms sounded, a pressure that sank into their bones and stirred the most primal corners of fear. The air grew colder, vibrating with the trembling resonance of a storm preparing to tear open fully. Across the Manufactorum plain, Artorias lifted his gaze toward the turbulent sky. The abyss inside him reacted in wary agitation, pulsing in slow waves as it sensed the imminent arrival of something deeply connected to chaos, but wholly incompatible with the shadow that clung to him. His posture straightened, greatsword angled toward the ground as the storm above split open. The rift formed with a deep, resonant roar that rolled across the land like a shuddering heartbeat. A spiraling tear widened across the heavens, spilling torrents of red-black energy into the atmosphere. Warp-touched winds howled downward, whipping dust, metal shards, and loose debris into a frenzy. The sky bled light, casting the Manufactorum ruins in shades of deep crimson. From the heart of the rift, shapes descended like embers falling from a vast inferno. At first, they appeared as streaks of shadow-trailing fire, but as they neared the ground, their forms solidified into armored figures and metallic drop sigils. Chaos Marines of the Black Legion plunged toward the surface, their war cries muted by the storm's roar. Their landing was brutal, smashing into Ferrocrete with enough force to send shockwaves rippling through the landscape. The first warband emerged through drifting dust clouds, towering forms clad in gold-trimmed obsidian armor. Their presence distorted the air, each movement radiating the raw essence of the Imperium. Their bolters hummed with unstable energy, and demon-touched power weapons flickered with blood-colored fire. They advanced across the ruins with the confidence of seasoned conquerors, guided by an instinct engraved into their corrupted souls. The warp rift pulsed again, widening to release yet another wave. Cultists poured through in writhing masses, their screams melting into the storm's howl. Behind them came demon engines, twisted machines animated by bound souls and rituals of carnage. Their footsteps cratered the ground, each movement accompanied by metallic shrieks of tortured machine spirits. The world trembled as the Chaos Lord finally emerged. Arcing lightning illuminated his silhouette, revealing a warrior encased in brutalized power armor adorned with demonic sigils. His horned helm glowed from within, and the axe he carried dripped with molten shadow. He landed with thunderous force, surveying the ruined plain with slow, predatory calm. His gaze fell upon Artorias instantly, drawn by the cold thrum of the abyss that radiated from him. The Chaos Lord sensed darkness within the night, but it felt colder than the warp, old and sorrow-bound, refusing the chaotic hunger of the ruinous powers. Interest sharpened into curiosity, and curiosity into challenge. The Lord advanced, boots crushing stone into powder. Artorias held his ground, shadows coiling around him like old companions stirred by coming war. The blood rift above continued to expand, feeding an invasion already unfolding in full fury. Valeria IX trembled beneath the weight of a new conflict, unaware that the dark warrior standing alone upon its plains carried a history of battles that reshaped the destiny of entire realms. And the storm watched in silence, waiting to witness the first clash between a knight of the abyss and a champion of the warp. The impact tremors from the descending warbands carried across the Manufactorum plain like the pulse of a colossal heartbeat. Each drop pod slammed into Ferrocrete with explosive force, sending molten fragments arcing through the air and showering the ruins in sparks. Dust rolled outward in great waves, dimming the blood-red lumens of the lowering sky. The air vibrated with static, alive with the sharp tang of ozone and the deeper, metallic scent of deep warp corruption. From the shattered pods rose the Chaos Space Marines of the Black Legion, towering transhuman warriors clad in black ceramite chased with gold. Their armor was carved with symbols of former glories, each plate scarred by centuries of war. Helm lenses glowed like twin suns burning behind soot-darkened glass. They emerged with deliberate, unhurried calm, secure in their dominion as apex predators walking among prey. The Manufactorum trembled beneath their weight. Servo joints whined as the corrupted Astartes adjusted their weapons. Bolters locked into firing positions with mechanical precision. Chainswords coughed into life, their grinding teeth eager for flesh. Warp fire flickered along the edges of their blades, giving their silhouettes an otherworldly shimmer. Their arrival was not simply a deployment. It was a statement of inevitable domination. Around them, cultists erupted in screams of fervor. They crawled from behind broken conveyors, rising from the rubble like vermin drawn to light. They pressed themselves against the armored legs of their masters in drunken reverence before scattering to prepare makeshift barricades. Their chants rose in discordant waves, echoing beneath the cracked ceilings of the Manufactorum sprawl. From the heart of the warband, a figure of greater authority moved with measured steps. The Chaos Lord's armor was a cathedral of violence, adorned with trophies taken from thousands of fallen foes. Skulls hung from chains across his chest. Flayed banners trailed behind him, whispering in winds that did not touch the living. His helm bore horns as thick as a bull's, glowing faintly with demon fire. In one gauntlet, he held a demon axe whose blade writhed with imprisoned malice. In the other, he carried the cold arrogance of one who had slain legends and worn their suffering like a cloak. His gaze locked instantly onto the lone knight standing among the ruins. The Lord sensed something different in the darkness surrounding Artorias, not the frenzied, uncontrolled warp taint of possessed warriors, not the summoned brutality of demons. The knight's shadow carried restraint, sorrow, and an ancient nobility warped by tragedy. The abyss pulsed around him in quiet defiance, refusing to bow to the warp's influence. The Chaos Lord advanced across the fractured plain, each step sinking deep into dust and shattered stone. Behind him, his warriors fanned out, forming a half-circle of towering death, their weapons trained on the night with the dispassionate precision of soldiers preparing to extinguish a threat. Artorias shifted his stance. Dust rose around his boots as the abyss stirred at the approach of this new corruption. His greatsword traced a faint line in the rubble, settling into the quiet rhythm that preceded violence. The Chaos Lord stopped a short distance before him, studying the night as one predator observes another. The storm roared above them, pulling the world's air into its spiraling lungs. Shadows danced along the edge of reality as two different realms of darkness recognized each other. The Manufactorum fell utterly silent. The duel was inevitable. A suffocating stillness stretched across the broken plain as the Chaos Lord and the Abysswalker faced one another. The wind, previously roaring through torn support beams, now moved in muted currents as if unwilling to disturb the delicate equilibrium between two warriors sculpted by different tragedies. Even the warp storm overhead seemed to shift in rhythm, its spirals slowing to observe the tension building on the ground below. The Chaos Lord towered in his hulking armor, every plate a testament to the long war he had waged across 1,000 broken worlds. The eyes of his helm glowed with pitiless hunger, scanning Artorias with predatory interest. The demon axe he carried pulsed with rhythmic malevolence, exhaling faint wisps of shadow into the air like the breath of a sleeping beast. As he stepped closer, the ground cracked beneath him, forced to bear the weight of a warrior who had shed humanity long ago. Artorias remained still at first, allowing the lingering echoes of past memories to fade into the background. His corrupted arm twitched, responding to the presence of a corruption not born of the abyss but of the warp's chaotic fury. Instinct sharpened within him, sculpted by battles fought in realms of sorrow and despair. The abyss surrounded him like a wounded companion, responding to the nearness of a rival darkness with low, pulsing agitation. The Chaos Lord raised his weapon in a slow, deliberate arc, not yet striking but offering a silent challenge. The gesture spoke of arrogance, of centuries spent crushing those who stood before him. He radiated confidence, expecting the knight to falter or charge recklessly. But Artorias merely lowered his stance, feet settling into the ground, blade angled with quiet precision. His breathing steadied, smoothing into the battle rhythm etched deep into his soul. The first motion came from the Lord, a powerful lunge propelled by the enhanced strength of a corrupted Astartes. His axe carved through the air in a wide, devastating sweep designed to cleave a man in two. Artorias moved with broken grace, stepping aside with a twisting pivot that betrayed his altered balance. The blade sang past him, cutting a gouge through the ferrocrete floor and showering the plain in shards. Before the Lord could recover, Artorias countered with a swift upward slash. The greatsword met ceramite with a ring that resonated through the ruins. Sparks burst across the Lord's armor, but the strike failed to penetrate the reinforced plates. Still, the impact drove the corrupted warrior a step back, and the abyss rippled along the blade as if testing the durability of this new enemy. Bolters roared from the nearby warband, only for the Lord to raise a hand and still them. He wanted the night for himself. Chaos Marines fell silent again, forming an unspoken circle around the battlefield as the duel continued. This time Artorias moved first. His blade swept low, transitioning into a spinning mid-strike that carried the violent unpredictability of his corrupted fighting style. The Lord parried the blow with the flat of his axe, but the force pushed him back further. The knight's relentless pressure, shaped by endless battles against creatures of the abyss, challenged even the enhanced reflexes of a transhuman warrior. The Chaos Lord retaliated with a crushing overhead strike that forced Artorias into a defensive role. His broken arm dragged slightly behind him, but he rose smoothly, blade positioned to deflect the follow-up assault. The abyss surged with every movement, guiding his attacks with ancient ferocity. Their weapons clashed again and again, sending shockwaves through the ruins. Each blow carried the weight of a different world, a different war, a different pain. The battle had only begun, yet already the ground trembled beneath them as darkness met darkness. And neither warrior showed any sign of yielding. The duel deepened into a brutal dance of instinct, will, and two irreconcilable forms of corruption. Every clash of metal echoed across the Manufactorum with the weight of ages, the sharp ring of Artorias' greatsword meeting the guttural growl of the demon axe. Sparks bled across the battlefield in luminous arcs, illuminating the combatants with ghost-like flashes of red and white. The Chaos Marines formed a silent perimeter, watching with reverence and anticipation. For them, this was a spectacle, a clash between a dark legend and a stranger weaving a new tale of shadow. Artorias moved with the jarring grace that defined his broken form, each dodge and pivot infused with the frantic intensity of a warrior who had long ago surrendered his body to battle's demands. His dodges carried the desperate elegance of someone still resisting a corruption he had failed to completely control. His landings trembled slightly, not from weakness but from the abyss coiled inside him, shifting unpredictably as it felt the presence of warp-born power. The Chaos Lord fought with overwhelming force, each swing of his axe fueled by centuries of genetic enhancement and dark blessing. His strikes carved trenches through the cracked ground, sending fragments of metal and stone flying in violent bursts. His armor absorbed glancing blows without concern, each dent and scar a testament to the endless war he had survived. But Artorias did not rely on brute strength alone. His movements blended speed, sorrow, and calculated ferocity. He slipped past sweeping blows with unnatural pivots, rolled beneath overhead strikes with broken precision, and struck in the small windows between the Lord's weighty attacks. His sword traced a pattern of relentless pressure, guided by a will that refused to bend. The Lord attempted to overpower him, driving forward with a barrage of heavy strikes meant to crush lesser foes. Artorias met this onslaught with unyielding resilience. Each parried strike sent tremors up his corrupted arm, yet he refused to falter. His stance absorbed the force like timeless stone weathering a storm, and slowly his blade began to leave marks on the Chaos Lord's armor. Thin grooves appeared along the Lord's greaves, shallow cuts dug into the plates of his gauntlets, a notch formed on the helm's left horn. None of these wounds crippled the corrupted Astartes, yet each one chipped away at his confidence. The Abysswalker's blade carved deeper with each exchange, growing more attuned to the fight, resonating faintly as the shadow within it awakened. The Chaos Lord roared wordlessly, the sound shaking dust loose from derelict rafters. His axe erupted with demon fire, the blade twisting unnaturally as the entity within it screamed for release. He surged forward with a ferocity too great for mortal reflexes, striking in unpredictable angles meant to corner the knight. Artorias responded with a desperate dive, sliding beneath the massive warrior's guard. His sword cut upward in a brutal rising arc, tearing a jagged line across the Lord's abdomen and sending sparks cascading down the corrupted ceramite. The Chaos Lord staggered, armor groaning under the force. Artorias pressed forward immediately, his blade becoming a whirlwind of shadow-touched slashes. Blow after blow hammered into the Lord's defenses. Each strike chipped away at armor, each impact drove him further back. The ground cracked beneath his retreating steps. The Abysswalker's aggression peaked, a relentless storm of technique and desperation blending into one lethal rhythm. At last, the Lord attempted a final desperate counterstrike, swinging his demon axe in a wide arc. Artorias saw the opening with grim certainty. His blade moved first. Steel met corrupted ceramite in a decisive, bone-shaking strike. The Chaos Lord fell, kneeling beneath the weight of a blow that shattered his armor's chest plate. Artorias stood above him, greatsword dripping with warp-tainted ichor, breath slow and unbroken. The duel had ended the only way it could, with one darkness overwhelming another. The moment the Chaos Lord's form collapsed into the dust, a deep tremor rippled through the abyss surrounding Artorias. It pulsed outward in concentric waves, responding to the surge of emotion and exertion bleeding from his soul. The shadows that clung to his armor stirred restlessly, rising like mist caught in a storm. The land near his feet darkened, cracks spreading outward as if reality itself recoiled from the change blossoming within him. Artorias staggered slightly, one knee dipping toward the ground as the abyss pushed against the fragile cage of his will. The corrupted arm hanging at his side twitched with sudden vigor, the memory of lost control flickering through his bones. For a breath, the knight felt the tug of the same abyssal hunger that had nearly devoured him in Oolacile, a hunger that whispered promises of strength without restraint. He braced himself against the weight of it, drawing a slow breath that trembled with conflict. The abyss was not a silent entity here. It reacted violently to the presence of warp corruption, as if offended by a rival form of darkness. Where the warp was chaotic, the abyss was sorrow. Where the warp reveled in destruction, the abyss mourned. These two shadows recognized one another with instinctive hostility, and the defeat of a warp-tainted warrior acted as a catalyst for the abyss's restless agitation. Black tendrils seeped from the cracks in Artorias' armor, tracing along the scorched ground in thin spirals. They did not spread far. Instead, they swirled in uneven patterns around him, as if unsure how to behave in this foreign realm. The energy thickened the air, dulling sound and softening light until the world felt muted and distant. The Chaos Marines watching from the perimeter stepped back, unnerved by the knight's shifting presence. Their enhanced senses detected the turbulence within him, a kind of controlled implosion of power building beneath a fragile barrier of will. Bolters rose, chainswords revved, and goggles flickered with corrupted runes as their bodies prepared to react to a threat they did not fully understand. Yet Artorias did not turn toward them. His focus remained inward, battling a surge of corruption that clawed at the edges of his consciousness. His breath deepened, rhythm slowing into the pattern carved into him through years of resisting the abyss. His grip tightened around the greatsword, its weight grounding him against the rising tide. Gradually, the tremor receded. The tendrils shrank back, retreating into the armor's fissures like a living shadow crawling to its den. The air lightened by degrees, releasing the tension that had clenched the ruins in its grip. The abyss remained, but quieter now, pulsing in exhausted rhythms rather than violent surges. Artorias rose to full height once more, his stance settled, his breath steadied. He stood amidst the broken remains of the Chaos Lord as a solitary sentinel, shaped by two worlds and belonging fully to neither. Around him, the Black Legion warriors hesitated, uncertain whether they witnessed the awakening of a new threat or the survival of a spirit too stubborn to fall. The storm above observed in silence, and the plane held its breath for what would follow. Far across the Manufactorum sprawl, Imperial guardsmen from the earlier patrol watched the end of the duel with a mixture of paralytic awe and cold disbelief. None of their training prepared them for the sight of a lone, unknown warrior cleaving through corrupted Astartes and warped monstrosities with ritualistic precision. Their hearts pounded inside armored chest plates as they tried to reconcile what they saw with the doctrines they had memorized since conscription. Their visors recorded everything, transmitting fragmented data back to command with static-laced urgency. Some attempted to put words to their observations, stammering into vox units that fought against the warp storm's interference. Others simply stared, breath fogging the inside of their helmets, hands tightening on lasgun grips that felt woefully inadequate. Artorias stood among the ruins, shadow-touched and silent. The abyss that coiled around him had subdued its earlier surge, yet its lingering presence stirred unease in even the most battle-hardened soldiers. It did not behave like warp energy, lacking the maddening whispers or feverish heat associated with chaos. Instead, it radiated a cold sorrow that pressed upon the heart like a distant memory of loss. One guardsman dared to step forward, only to freeze mid-stride as the knight slowly shifted his posture. Artorias did not turn toward them immediately. Instead, he surveyed the battlefield with the calm focus of one measuring the aftermath of conflict. Broken forms of Chaos Marines lay at his feet, their corrupted armor leaking warp-tainted smoke. These were enemies the guardsmen had learned to fear through instruction and bitter experience. To see them defeated not by artillery, not by Astartes, but by a solitary figure, forced every belief they held to tremble. A second guardsman whispered a prayer to the Emperor, voice shaking. Another checked his weapon repeatedly, as though expecting the knight to turn on them at any moment. A third simply removed his helmet, needing the raw air to convince himself that the moment was real. Vox chatter from command burst through the static in clipped bursts, urging the patrol to maintain distance, observe, and avoid conflict. The orders brought little comfort. The soldiers felt as though they had stumbled upon a force older than their doctrines, a warrior whose presence defied categorization. Artorias finally turned toward them. His visor, cracked and shadowed, revealed nothing of his expression. The dark residue around his armor pulsed faintly, reacting to their fear with quiet alertness. Yet the knight made no move to attack. No surge of aggression followed his gaze. Instead, he simply stood, waiting, assessing, choosing restraint over violence. This lack of hostility troubled the guardsmen more than open aggression might have. It marked the knight as a being with purpose, not a mindless corruption. Purpose made him unpredictable. Purpose made him dangerous. The Manufactorum plain remained silent as both sides evaluated the other. Above them, the warp storm churned with renewed fury, as if impatient with the hesitation of mortals. Somewhere deeper in the hive, Imperial command absorbed the live feed of the encounter, and within that command, concern tightened like a clenched fist. The Imperium had gained a potential ally, or a new legend of destruction had just stepped into their war. High above Valyria IX, on the orbital bastion stationed at the edge of the warp storm's reach, the Inquisition watched the unfolding chaos with sharpened suspicion. Within the fortress's cold-lit stratagem, towering hololiths displayed fractured images streaming from scrambled Vox feeds and strained Auspex arrays. Most feeds faltered under the storm's interference, but a handful remained intact long enough to reveal the anomaly at the Manufactorum plain, and those glimpses were enough. Inquisitorial syrengens pulsed with warning sigils, projecting fragmented predictions into the dim chamber. The rune for unsanctioned anomaly flickered with increasing urgency. The runes for potential Xeno's life form, unknown abomination, and unregistered psyker sparked erratically, each one contradicting the next. The predictive cogitators, built to classify horrors beyond mortal understanding, struggled to place the anomaly into any known threat category. Inquisitor Liren Vost stood at the center of this storm of information, her lean frame wrapped in carapace armor decorated with purity seals that fluttered in the recycled air. Her augmentic eye glowed as she zoomed in on the image of a lone knight carving a path through chaos forces. She watched frame by frame as the warrior moved with an unsettling hybrid of discipline and corruption, the abyss swelling around him in patterns unfamiliar, even to one seasoned in the study of the warp's horrors. Her experience cataloged countless forms of mutation, heresy, and warp taint, yet none matched the quiet, disciplined shadow clinging to the knight. To her senses, it felt not like chaos, but like something older, something that had been wounded and learned to mourn its own existence. And that made it more dangerous, for sorrow forged its own kind of power. Her retinue of acolytes crowded the lower steps of the stratagem, their posture tense as the Inquisitor absorbed the data pouring in. Each whispered analysis grew more troubled. Some speculated that the knight was a lost relic of a forgotten imperial order. Others suspected a Xenos champion disguised in human armor. One junior acolyte nervously suggested the possibility of a demon masquerading in mortal form. Vost silenced that notion with a single raised hand. Demons exuded hunger and deceit. This figure radiated burden and resolve. She replayed the moment the knight felled the Chaos Lord. The strike carried precision, sorrow, and purpose, not the manic rage of a corrupted psyker, nor the clinical detachment of an assassin. It was the strike of a warrior who knew despair intimately yet refused to let it define his final act. Her decision solidified with the inevitability of a blade falling into place. The Inquisition would make intervention. A teleport beacon activated somewhere deep within the fortress's core, its hum spreading through the metal like a somber chant. Orders flowed through encrypted channels, directing stormtroopers to prepare for immediate deployment. Interrogator scholars readied their grim liturgical rites. Sight trackers calibrated sensory wards designed to bind warp-touched entities. Inquisitor Vost watched the warp storm curl around the planet below with the silent patience of a vulture studying a dying creature. She sensed the threads of fate around the knight bending, weaving themselves into the future of Valyria IX. His presence was no accident. It was a fracture in reality's rhythm, and fractures could either herald salvation or calamity. Her voice carried quiet finality as she stepped away from the hololith. The anomaly would be found, examined, classified, and if necessary, destroyed. But in the depths of her seasoned intuition, she sensed a truth that unsettled even her ironclad certainty. This knight was not a mistake of the warp. He was a challenge to it. The Manufactorum plain lay in uneasy silence after the collapse of the Chaos Lord, broken only by the distant echoes of retreating cultists fleeing their fallen master. Smoke drifted from fractured pipes in slow, wavering plumes. Across the charred expanse, the knight stood amidst ruin, his presence steady yet heavy with the exhaustion of burdens carried across worlds. From the distant gates of Hive Talion, a small procession emerged, unexpected amidst the ongoing war. At its head walked a lone priest of the Imperial Creed, robes frayed by age and hardship, purity seals trailing behind him like fading prayers fluttering in a storm. Though unarmed and lightly armored, he moved with a calm bravery born not of strength but of conviction. Father Eman Thales had served Valyria IX for over 3 decades, ministering to Hive workers, frontline soldiers, and broken families torn apart by chaos incursions. His face carried the lines of a man who had buried more loved ones than he could count, yet his eyes retained a soft, quiet fire. He had witnessed miracles born from desperation and horrors born from faith twisted into madness. And as he neared the fallen Manufactorum district, he felt something unlike any presence he had encountered before. The knight's shadow was unmistakable even from a distance, moving with a rhythm he could not place. It pulsed with sorrow, grief, and restrained fury, not the writhing mania he associated with warp corruption, not the hollow hunger of demonic essence. It felt instead like a wound, old, deep, and unhealed. Thales approached with measured steps, ignoring the warnings shouted by nearby guardsmen who pleaded for him to stay back. He felt neither fear nor hesitation. The creed taught that faith was strongest where reason faltered, and this moment demanded faith. As he drew closer, he studied the knight with weary eyes. The armor spoke of a forgotten age, forged with reverence and scarred by tragedy. The broken arm, the corrupted residue lingering around him, the greatsword resting point down in fractured stone. Every detail told a tale of struggle that stretched beyond mortal lifetimes. The priest felt a quiet sorrow radiating from the warrior, as palpable as heat from a dying forge. And in that sorrow he sensed something sacred, an unbroken will still fighting, despite all that had been lost. He stepped within a few paces of the knight, the manufactorum wind tugging at his robes. The knight's posture shifted, abyss stirring softly in response to a new presence. Shadows flickered around him, not in hostility but in instinctive vigilance. Thales lifted a hand slowly, not in command but in acknowledgement. He spoke softly, voice steady despite the grim sky above. His words carried no demands, no warnings, only recognition. He spoke of burden, of sacrifice, of the countless warriors who had given their lives for humanity's fragile hope. He spoke of a galaxy drowning in darkness, yet still clinging to acts of defiance where small lights challenged overwhelming night. Artorias listened without turning fully, his gaze fixed on distant ruins as memories churned beneath the surface of his thoughts. He did not know the priest's language, yet something in the cadence, in the tone, in the quiet sincerity resonated with him. The abyss around him settled, pulsing in slow, somber rhythm. For a brief moment, the world felt less divided between realms, shadows, and war. Two figures, one forged in sorrow, the other born of faith, stood together on a battlefield marked by ruin. Thales sensed neither salvation nor doom in the knight's presence. Lonely potential, terrifying and profound. And somewhere deep within Artorias's fractured spirit, a faint flicker stirred, perhaps recognition, perhaps memory, or perhaps the echo of a wolf he once swore to protect. The priest led Artorias toward Hive Talion's inner district, with the caution of a man guiding a storm through fragile halls. The manufactorum ruins gradually gave way to fortified walkways and towering buttresses that framed the Hive city's heart. Servitors cleared debris from pathways as citizens fled into shelters, glancing nervously at the knight who strode behind the priest like a shadow given form. Their destination rose ahead, a colossal cathedral carved directly into the Hive's central superstructure. Its spires pierced the crimson sky like the blades of 100 colossal knives, etched with symbols of devotion older than the city itself. Incense smoke leaked from shattered stained glass windows, carrying with it the scent of ancient oils and burning candles. The doors of the cathedral stood open, welcoming yet trembling under the weight of the chaos unfolding outside. Inside, the air shifted from industrial grit to quiet reverence. Statues of the emperor's saints lined the hall, their expressions carved in stoic defiance. Frescoes depicting battles of antiquity arched overhead, capturing victories long mythologized by the Imperium. Servoskulls drifted between pillars, their hollow eyes glowing dimly as if struggling to process the anomaly in their midst. But it was the shrine at the cathedral's heart that drew Artorias's focus. 18 towering statues encircled a central dais, representations of the Primarchs, the Emperor's sons, legends whose influence still shaped the Imperium. Each figure carried an aura of solemn importance, their stone faces betraying themes of loss, pride, betrayal, or unwavering loyalty. Artorias felt echoes of their presence like faint vibrations, ghostly impressions of warriors whose destinies had scarred the galaxy. Among the statues stood one carved in darker stone, set back from the circle as if exiled from the pantheon of heroes. The figure's identity was obscured, facial features softened by time or deliberate omission. Yet its posture, one arm ruined, the other wielding a massive sword, mirrored Artorias with uncanny precision. Shadows gathered around its base, pooling in unnatural shapes as though the stone itself remembered something forbidden. The knight paused, breath catching in his chest, as the abyss stirred with uncomfortable recognition. He felt a pull, deep and resonant, as if the stone figure knew his pain intimately. The priest watched the knight carefully, sensing the gravity of the moment. He spoke softly, describing the shrine's purpose. This hall was a sanctuary for memory, a place where the Imperium honored its heroes, mourned its fallen, and whispered of those lost to history. Among these statues, the forgotten figure represented a mystery. Some claimed it honored a lost Primarch erased from Imperial record. Others believed it symbolized a guardian who would return when humanity faced its darkest hour. Artorias stepped closer, shadows trailing behind him. His gauntleted hand reached outward, barely brushing the cold stone. The abyss pulsed violently, resonating with the shrine's lingering sorrow. For a moment he glimpsed faint visions, a battlefield bathed in ruinous fire, a fractured oath, a warrior's lonely defiance across unimaginable spans of time. The cathedral creaked under the pressure of distant bombardments, reality trembling as the warp storm deepened overhead. Artorias lowered his hand, silent and burdened. The shrine had not given him answers, but it had returned to him a truth long buried. He was not alone in bearing the weight of a world's tragedy, even in this foreign land. The darkness inside him shifted, no longer simply a wound, but a reflection among other forgotten burdens. The quiet reverence within the cathedral, fractured as proximity alarms blared across Hive Talion. Red warning sigils flared to life along the stone pillars, and servo skulls scattered into defensive formations. Through the shattered stained glass windows came the low rumble of engines descending from the storm-dark sky, the sound rolling through the nave like the growl of a predator closing in on wounded prey. Artorias sensed them before they landed, sharp minds trained in suspicion, armored hearts forged in doctrine, souls tempered to scrutinize every anomaly. The abyss pulsed in cautious tension, tightening its grip on the night's senses. He turned slightly toward the cathedral's entrance, greatsword sliding free from his thigh with a quiet scrape of metal against stone. The priest stepped forward instinctively, a small figure before a rising tide of force. Valkyrian pattern dropships thundered onto the cathedral's upper platforms, their retro thrusters igniting the air with searing plumes. Armored hatches burst open, releasing squads of inquisitorial stormtroopers who moved with disciplined precision. Their carapace armor bore purity seals and inquisitorial markings, each soldier radiating unwavering purpose. They descended the cathedral steps in tight formation, weapons trained inward, converging on the night from multiple angles. Auspex units hummed as they scanned the air around Artorias, struggling to categorize the fluctuating shadows twisting faintly around him. Their fingers tightened around triggers, their breaths grew controlled and shallow. At their head walked Inquisitor Vost. Her armor, dark and ceremonial, carried a grim elegance. Robes of deep crimson trailed behind her, brushing across cracked tiles as she advanced. The augmentic eye glowed with unsettling clarity, analyzing Artorias in calculated intervals. She moved with the quiet gravity of a woman who had condemned worlds with a single gesture and saved others with reluctant mercy. Voss stepped into the cathedral's central aisle, staring at the night without blinking. The atmosphere around her thickened with her authority, filling the space with unspoken judgment. Her acolytes fanned out, chanting low liturgies designed to weaken warp entities. Sigils etched into their armor glowed faintly, reacting to the abyss that clung to Artorias. The knight lifted his blade, positioning it defensively, not in aggression, but as instinct leading him to guard the shrine and the priest nearby. The abyss stirred, wrapping around his limbs like a restless shadow, ready to spill into motion at the slightest provocation. The Inquisitor raised one gauntleted hand. The stormtroopers stopped instantly, but their weapons remained fixed on the knight. Voss studied him with a depth of suspicion that bordered on reverence. She had seen corruption masquerading as innocence, demons wearing the forms of saints, and psychers who could shatter minds with untrained whispers. Yet nothing she had encountered reflected the quiet sorrow emanating from this warrior. Her voice, low and steady, carried through the cathedral like a blade drawn from a scabbard. Though Artorias did not understand her words, he understood her intent: authority, caution, judgment, and a warning wrapped in fragile diplomacy. The abyss twisted around him, pulsing with the memory of betrayal. He had been hunted before, misunderstood before, condemned before. His stance lowered, muscles tightening, preparing for inevitable conflict. But the priest stepped between them, hands raised in calm defiance. His presence was a small anchor of trust in the rising storm. He pleaded without force, without fear, resting his faith upon a warrior of unknown sorrow. For a moment, tension stretched across the cathedral like a drawn bowstring. The Inquisitor gazed at the priest, then at the knight. Her augmentic eye narrowed as she weighed risk against necessity, doctrine against instinct, and though her posture remained rigid, something in her calculation shifted. The cathedral held its breath. Conflict loomed like a shadow just beyond reach, waiting for the spark that would ignite it. The standoff shattered in a single fractured heartbeat. A sudden crack of displaced air rang through the cathedral as a purity seal ignited in volatile reaction to the abyss's pulse. Stormtroopers reacted instantly, believing the anomaly a sign of warp aggression. Bolters roared, muzzle flashes blooming in rapid succession as disciplined volleys poured toward the knight. Artorias moved before thought could fully form. He dropped low, sweeping to the side with a burst of broken agility that sent his cape tearing through drifting dust. Lasfare seared past him, carving scorching lines into ancient stone. The abyss surged at the sudden threat, rising to envelop him in a pulse of darkness. He felt it strain against its restraints, eager to consume, to defend without restraint. But his will, sharpened by years of resisting corruption, held it in check. Stormtroopers advanced in a staggered formation, each step precise, each volley synchronized. Their armor glinted beneath the cathedral's fractured light. Firing lines shifted to box the knight in, pushing him toward the shrine in a controlled approach meant to overwhelm even superhuman foes. But Artorias was not trapped. He sprang upward, body twisting midair with the jagged grace of one trained to fight while wounded. A bolt round grazed his thigh plate, sending sparks cascading down his greaves. He landed on the flank, sword cutting a sweeping arc that forced the nearest squad to break formation. They stumbled back, shields raised too late to avoid the shockwave that erupted from the abyss-enriched strike. The floor cracked beneath the force. Two acolytes advanced with psi-binding rods, chanting litanies meant to anchor warp-touched beings. The rods glowed with flickering blue runes, crackling with the energy of forcibly caged psychic storms. They thrust them toward the knight, intent on binding him in place. Artorias pivoted sharply, avoiding one blow and catching the other with the flat of his blade. The impact released a jolt of unstable energy, sending one acolyte crashing backward into a stone pillar. Vost raised her hand to issue a command, but the conflict had slipped beyond simple control. Her stormtroopers flowed around her like living armor, seeking firing angles that avoided hitting their mistress while keeping the knight pinned. Their discipline was impeccable, yet discipline alone could not match the Abysswalker's instinctive mastery of combat. Artorias closed the distance on the nearest squad with sudden, feral speed. A downward strike shattered a shield and sent the trooper sprawling. The knight moved past him without finishing the kill, drifting to the next threat with relentless efficiency. His restraint was deliberate, even in the midst of chaos. He struck to disable, not destroy. He fought to survive, not to slaughter. The Inquisitor felt the weight of this truth settle over her. The knight fought like a wounded guardian, not a creature of the warp. Still, conflict escalated. Gunfire erupted again as more stormtroopers arrived through the upper nave, rappelling down with precision. They aimed for his legs, his arms, any vulnerable point that might slow him. Each blast chipped at his armor or scraped across his corrupted shell. Yet still he endured, breath-steady, movements unwavering. The abyss flickered violently now, sensing its host threatened on all sides. Shadows coiled outward, creeping across the floor in erratic pulses. The cathedral grew dimmer as its presence deepened, absorbing lumens and muting sound. Artorias' greatsword pulsed with cold, sorrowful power, an echo of all he had lost. He spun through incoming fire, blades sweeping in a circle that forced the soldiers back. Dust billowed outward, pillars cracked, statues shook under the strain of unleashed energies. The clash between faith and forgotten darkness carved new wounds into the sacred hall. The battle ended not with victory, but with a breath, the kind that comes after violence, heavy and trembling, as both sides realized the cost of pushing further. Artorias stood amidst shattered stone. The Inquisition stood ready to strike again. And between them, the priest whispered a prayer for mercy neither side yet understood. The cathedral's echoing tumult receded in uneven waves as dust settled across cracked tiles and broken pews. For a long moment, silence grew heavy, shaped by the breathless tension of soldiers who held their weapons aimed yet dared not fire the next volley. The abyss retreated into a tight coil around Artorias, pulsing in slow ripples as though gauging whether the storm of violence had passed or merely paused. Artorias remained still at the center of the ruined nave, blade lowered but ready to rise in an instant. His stance spoke of measured vigilance rather than lingering aggression. The fractured stone beneath his boots bore the memory of his movements, each crack a frozen echo of the chaos he had survived. Shadows clung faintly to his armor, swaying with the rhythm of his breath, feeding on the tension that saturated the cathedral. Stormtroopers held their ranks with disciplined fear, their visors tracking the knight's every subtle shift. Sweat gathered along brows hidden beneath helmets, breaths echoing in the confines of rebreathers. Their Auspex units flickered with scrambled readings, unable to distinguish hostile warp anomalies from the subdued tremor of the abyss. They waited not for orders, but for inevitability, believing that sooner or later the confrontation would ignite again. Yet the knight did not advance. He simply breathed, resolute and burdened. At the far end of the hall, Inquisitor Vost stepped forward through drifting dust, her cloak brushing lightly across fractured stone. She moved with deliberate grace, every step chosen with care, not out of fear but calculation. The augmentic eye glowed faintly as it scrutinized the knight with renewed clarity. She saw the exhaustion behind his stillness, the precision behind his restraint, and the sorrow that clung to him like a second shadow. The priest remained between them, trembling slightly yet refusing to yield ground. His presence formed a fragile line of faith, thin as the thread of a candle, flame in a storm. Vost observed him briefly, then allowed her gaze to return to the knight. Her mind parsed through endless doctrines and punitive mandates. The Inquisition demanded interrogation, classification, and containment. Protocol insisted that any unknown force capable of overwhelming her retinue should be purged without hesitation. Logic dictated danger. Duty demanded action. But instinct, the rare, fragile instinct she seldom trusted, whispered a different interpretation. She replayed in her mind the moments of battle, the knight's precise avoidance of lethal blows, the measured targeting of weapons rather than soldiers' bodies, the decision to disable instead of slaughter. His violence had been controlled, purposeful. He was no berserker, no demon feeder reveling in carnage. There had been no hunger in his strikes, only necessity, a protective instinct, wounded yet not extinguished. Her retinue awaited her command with breathless tension. A single order would unleash another storm of gunfire, another wave of liturgical binding rites, another clash that might bring the cathedral crumbling upon their heads. They were ready for it, conditioned for it. Yet something in the knight's steady posture forced her to pause. Vost lowered her raised hand by a deliberate fraction. Her soldiers tensed, awaiting a signal that did not come. Her acolytes leaned forward, listening for the words that would validate their fear. The air thickened as she weighed her choice beneath the cathedral's dim, fractured light. The priest exhaled shakily as he sensed the Inquisitor's shift, his faith settling like dust after a long tremor. Vost finally stepped closer, not as a hunter closing in for the kill, but as one acknowledging the presence of a force she did not yet understand. In that quiet decision, a fragile path opened between annihilation and alignment. The knight's blade remained lowered. The Inquisition's weapons did not fire. And the storm above tightened its coils, sensing that the world below had not escaped its upheaval, only delayed it. Far above the trembling Hive City, the warp storm convulsed with renewed fury as the death of the Chaos Lord rippled through its depths. The Imperium recoiled like a wounded beast, its howling currents swirling into a vortex of wrath. In that seething chaos, the remnants of a greater force stirred, predators sensing blood, commanders sensing opportunity, entities sensing the break of equilibrium. Then the heavens tore open. Reality fractured with a thunderous rumble as the first Chaos warship burst through the warp's veil. Its hull was a jagged cathedral of desecration, adorned with screaming faces trapped in warped metal. Engines bled corrupted fire. Its colossal silhouette eclipsed the sun, casting a shadow that swallowed entire districts in darkness. One by one, more vessels emerged, 12 in total, forming a dread fleet that circled Valyria IX like vultures around a dying beast. On the command bridge of the Black Legion's flagship, corrupted strategists roared their triumph. The death of their ground commander had not shattered their resolve, it had inflamed it. The warp rift above the Hive City pulsed in response, widening to accommodate the fleet's battle psychics, their chants reinforcing the storm that shielded them from Imperial retaliation. Below, Valyria IX trembled under the onslaught of orbital bombardment. Long-range macro cannons unleashed firestorms of molten metal that tore across the Manufactorum plains. Entire blocks collapsed in roaring cascades of rubble. Anti-air defenses ignited with frantic desperation, missiles streaking into the sky only to vanish in flickers as the warp bent space around the Chaos vessels. Plasma columns rained from orbit, slicing through defensive barricades and carving molten ravines across fortified lines. Hive Talion's void shields flickered beneath the strain, their lumens dimming as machine spirits screamed against the violation. Tech priests chanted in panic cycles, their mechadendrites convulsing as they tried to reinforce overtaxed generators. Vox channels erupted into frantic calls from frontline positions now engulfed in firestorms. The Hive's upper spires shattered under the impact of demon-possessed boarding torpedoes. Each torpedo breached outer armor with seismic violence, delivering squads of Chaos Marines directly into critical sectors. Nests of cultists flooded into breached gantries, spreading corruption through the Hive's arteries. The Imperium responded with desperate coordination. Regiments mobilized from barracks carved into mid-spire levels. Castellan walls deployed their battlements. Veteran squads moved toward choke points where they might delay the onslaught by moments if not minutes. Even civilian militias armed themselves with makeshift weapons, ready to die beneath banners of faith. But above all this chaos, one figure stood apart. Artorias watched the sky tear itself open, shadow expanding behind him in a slow pulse. He saw fire raining upon the Hive City, heard distant screams of panic, and felt the cold, hollow familiarity of a world collapsing under the weight of darkness. It reminded him of Oolacile, of a kingdom consumed by a corruption no army could hope to quell. The knight's corrupted arm twitched as memory intertwined with present reality. His spirit flinched, but his resolve hardened into steel. War, tragedy, and invasion, these were landscapes he had walked before. And once more, he had been thrust into a battle where hope seemed an afterthought to survival. The Chaos Fleet did not bring simple conquest. It brought total war. And through the swirling storm, the abyss whispered not with hunger, but with a heavy, somber call to arms. As the hive city shook beneath orbital fire, a new tension coiled around the cathedral, a different kind of silence settling before decisive action. Smoke filtered through shattered windows, trailing down the nave like mourning veils. Outside, distant alarms wailed through the rising cacophony of battle. The world trembled under the weight of a battle it could not win alone. Artorias stood unmoving at the nave's center, his shadow stirring with the pulse of the abyss. His senses reached outward, absorbing the chaos unfolding beyond the cathedral's cracked walls, familiar yet foreign, overwhelming yet inevitable. He tasted the scent of war, burning metal, ruptured stone, and the thick, metallic tang of fear, not unlike battles long past, not unlike the fall of Oolacile. The Inquisitor watched him carefully, her posture firm yet tinged with something newly formed, cautious respect, shaped by observation rather than trust. The priest at her side prayed beneath his breath, hands clasped in trembling sincerity. Stormtroopers formed a perimeter, weapons lowered but ready, unsure how to interpret the night's stillness. A series of tremors rolled beneath their feet, signaling the landing of additional chaos forces within the hive's walls. The cathedral lights flickered, casting Artorias' silhouette across the cracked stone in towering fragments. The knight's pulse quickened with ancient instinct, not of fear but responsibility. He had not come to this world willingly. But now that he stood upon its broken soil, he could not ignore its suffering. With slow, deliberate movement, he lifted his greatsword. Dust fell from the blade's edge in soft cascades. The abyss pulsed in sympathy, not in hunger, but in recognition. Another siege, another lost city, another chance to stand where others fell. His steps echoed through the cathedral, each one steady, each one carrying quiet certainty. Stormtroopers stiffened, weapons rising reflexively, but the Inquisitor held her arm aloft and halted them. She sensed that whatever decision the knight made now would shape the fate of the battle. He moved toward the shattered doorway, gaze fixed on the crimson sky where chaos vessels bled fire upon the hive. Shadows followed him, weaving around his boots like remnants of forgotten oaths. The priest whispered a fearful plea, fearing he walked toward oblivion. But Artorias stopped at the threshold only long enough to steady his breath. His posture straightened as though donning unseen mantle, something older than armor, older than fear. Duty, the same duty that had led him into the abyss for the sake of a friend he failed to save. He did not speak, his resolve spoke for him. He walked into the storm. The Inquisitor felt the air shift with his departure, as if the cathedral itself exhaled in relief or reverence. Her mind raced, weighing risks and possibilities. Every instinct warned her of the danger. Every tactical projection revealed the necessity. She nodded once quietly, to no one in particular. Artorias had volunteered without a word, yet the intention rang louder than any war cry. He would face the chaos incursion head-on, not for the Imperium, not for faith, not even for survival. He moved because darkness threatened the innocent. And he could not refuse that call, no matter the world. The Chaos Fleet intensified its assault, and the warp storm above Valeria IX convulsed in violent spasms. Blood-red lightning cracked across the sky, tearing open rifts that spilled raw corruption into the atmosphere. With each convulsion, reality faltered, bending under the weight of a presence preparing to cross into the material world. Artorias sensed it immediately, a tremor that pierced through the chaos with singular purpose. The Daemon Prince arrived not as a figure, but as an eruption. The ground fractured in a thunderous explosion as a rift tore open above the city's central district. Warp fire cascaded downward like molten night, coalescing into a vast silhouette descending with the inevitability of a collapsing star. The creature's wings unfurled in jagged bursts, their leathery membranes streaked with veins of living darkness. Horns curled from its skull like jagged spires, and its armor, if armor it could be called, shifted like molten iron infused with screaming souls. Its landing shook the hive to its foundations, sending shockwaves across the rubble-strewn streets. Buildings groaned under the impact, windows shattered in rings of destructive resonance, and entire blocks crumbled as the demon's roar rolled across the landscape. Its eyes burned with the predatory hunger of a being forged in violence, sculpted by hatred, elevated by the worship of millions lost to chaos. Artorias stood on a fractured platform overlooking the central district, watching the creature rise from its crater. The abyss pulsed violently, sensing the presence of a foe far beyond the strength of corrupted Astartes or mutated beasts. This was a champion of the warp, an apex predator of destruction, whose power radiated like a furnace tearing at the seams of reality. The Daemon Prince turned its gaze upward, sensing the lone knight standing above it. The Abysswalker felt the weight of its attention like the pressure of a collapsing mountain, suffocating, merciless, ancient. The creature's resonance pressed against his soul, seeking weakness, demanding submission. But Artorias did not yield. The knight descended the ruined steps with controlled precision, stepping through plumes of dust and embers. His greatsword hung at his side, shadow dripping from its edge like thick, black rain. The fractured ground trembled beneath him, but his posture remained resolute. He had faced horrors that broke kingdoms and consumed heroes. He had faced Manus, father of the abyss. He had fallen, risen, failed, and fought again. He knew what it meant to stand before a monster born from absolute darkness. The Daemon Prince advanced with thunderous strides, each step crushing Ferrocrete under its taloned feet. Its wings spread wide, casting an eclipse over the battlefield. Its claws burned with warp fire, ready to tear apart this insignificant warrior who dared challenge its ascendance. Artorias slid into his stance. His breathing steadied, his grip tightened. The abyss coiled around him in a slow, mournful surge. The two forces met in the ruined heart of the Hive City. The demon struck first, a colossal swipe that carved a gouge through the street, shattering the remains of a fallen tower. Artorias leaped aside with broken grace, rolling into an upward strike that carved a thin line across the demon's corrupted hide. The wound hissed and sealed immediately, but the attack earned the creature's attention. It roared again, a sound that bent air and shook the world. Artorias braced himself for the oncoming storm. The final confrontation had begun. The battle between Artorias and the Daemon Prince erupted into a storm of ruin that shattered everything within reach. The city buckled beneath their clash, Ferrocrete rupturing in violent waves, as the demon's strikes carved deep scars into the landscape. Artorias moved through those tremors with determination forged in bitterness and sacrifice, his battered armor reflecting the flickering chaos of warp fire. The Daemon Prince towered above him, each blow carrying the force of a falling mountain. Its claws tore chunks of stone and steel like brittle parchment, sending debris raining through the ruined streets. When its wings beat the air, shockwaves toppled shattered towers. Its laughter, twisted and hollow, vibrated through the bones of anyone within earshot. Artorias endured. He pivoted beneath sweeping claws, dodged the crackling arc of a warp-forged blade, countered with sharp slashes that carved through layers of corrupted flesh. His greatsword moved in desperate rhythm, driven by sheer will rather than strength. Every motion drew upon techniques honed in the abyss, shaping his momentum through broken form and unnatural angles. He struck again and again, forcing the demon to remain focused on him alone. The abyss surged within him, responding to the intensity of the battle. Shadows flickered, swirling in violent spirals that absorbed glimmers of warp fire and returned them as pulses of cold, forlorn energy. Artorias felt the corruption stirring, reaching for dominance. The strain of resisting it sharpened every breath, every heartbeat, every choice. The Daemon Prince sensed the tension. Its lips curled in a cruel mockery of understanding. It pressed harder, slamming its claw into the ground and sending a shockwave that hurled Artorias backward. He crashed into a collapsed walkway, shards of metal biting into his armor. The abyss reacted violently, flaring with dark currents that wrapped around his limbs like chains begging to be broken. He forced himself upright. Pain pulsed through his body, the broken arm throbbing with old agony. His vision blurred. Memories of Oolacile, of his fall, flickered behind his eyes, but the resolve carved into him through tragedy refused to waver. He took one breath, another. Shadows steadied around him at the force of his will. The Daemon Prince charged. Artorias advanced to meet it. The collision shook the district. Their forms blurred in a clash of steel, shadow, fang, and fire. Artorias ducked beneath the demon's sweep, driving his greatsword upward into its abdomen. The blade sank deep, the abyss burning cold against warp-touched flesh. The demon shrieked as dark energy rippled through its core, but it did not fall. Instead, it seized him by the pauldrons and hurled him across the battlefield. Artorias skidded across broken stone, shadow scattering wildly. The abyss rose in turbulent agony. This world's corruption challenged it, feeding its instability. For a moment, Artorias felt the edge of surrender, a whisper urging him to abandon restraint, to unleash the abyss fully, to drown the demon in absolute darkness. But he remembered Sif. He remembered who he had been, who he had fought to be, and the abyss bent to his will. Summoning every remaining thread of strength, he stood again, shaking, burdened but unbroken. The Daemon Prince lunged, sensing his end. Artorias moved first. He drew upon the last reserve of his abyss-born strength, channeling it into one final, devastating leap. His blade ignited with a surge of sorrowful darkness as he struck downward with all that remained of him. The sword pierced the demon's skull. Warp fire exploded outward, screaming as its essence tore apart. The demon toppled. Artorias fell to one knee. The Abysswalker had endured once more. But the price of triumph weighed heavily upon him, his breath unsteady, his shadow trembling in the still-burning ruins. The battle was won, but his war was far from over. The Daemon Prince's corpse smoldered where it had fallen, warp fire draining from its broken form in slow, reluctant streams. Its twisted armor cracked and crumbled, leaking streams of corrupted ichor that hissed where they touched the fractured streets. The air around the fallen monstrosity shimmered with lingering psychic residue, as if reality itself struggled to forget the shape it had just been forced to hold. Artorias knelt beside the ruin he had made, greatsword still buried in the demon's skull. His breaths came in slow, unsteady pulls, the weight of the battle resting on his shoulders like the memory of an old curse. The abyss seethed within him, overstretched and raw, its energy thrumming along his veins like liquid iron. Every heartbeat felt like a hammer blow, each one accompanied by a tremor of shadow that threatened to unravel his control. His armor bore the full story of the confrontation. Plates were shattered, edges torn, joints strained to the point of failure. A deep gash along his side leaked a thin trail of darkened blood, mingled with the residue of the abyss. The broken arm that had once betrayed him in Oolacile now hung nearly lifeless, motionless even under the strain of victory. Yet despite all of this, his eyes, hidden behind shadowed helm and visor, remained fixed upon the fallen demon with quiet, unwavering focus. Around them, the city reacted slowly, as if waking from a nightmare. Imperial forces, who had watched from battered defensive lines and shattered redoubts, began to move cautiously toward the crater. Guardsmen advanced in hesitant lines, lasguns lowered as their minds struggled to reconcile what they had witnessed. To them, the Daemon Prince was a force of apocalyptic ruin. To see it lying dead at the feet of a single, unknown knight was to watch a myth of terror rewritten before their eyes. The Inquisitor arrived shortly after, cloak torn by stray debris, armor dusted with ash. Vost moved through the gathering soldiers without a word, her gaze locked on the kneeling warrior. Her augmentic eye recorded every detail, the trembling shadows, the labored breathing, the faint glow of the abyss receding from its heightened surge. She saw the cost written across his posture, the toll etched into the subtle sagging of his shoulders. Artorias placed both hands on the greatsword's hilt, drawing in one last slow breath before wrenching the blade free from the demon's skull. The motion sent a final pulse of corrupted energy into the ground, scattering the residual warp fire in a brief, chaotic burst. With the blade released, the demon's form collapsed in on itself, a grotesque monument to the fallen will of chaos. The knight rose unsteadily, every motion weighted with exhaustion. Shadows clung to him less violently now, curling in subdued patterns that reflected his fading strength. The abyss was quiet, not gone, never gone, but spent, like an overdrawn tide receding reluctantly from the shore. The victory was undeniable, yet it did not bring triumph, only a heavy stillness. Artorias swayed slightly, the world around him tilting at the edges of his vision. The pain, long suppressed by the demands of battle, surged through his body in delayed waves. His grip loosened for a moment, fingers trembling around the greatsword's hilt. The abyss reacted with a dull, protective stir, but it too was weary, straining to hold its form in this alien world. His knee touched the shattered ground again, not in surrender, but in quiet acknowledgement of limits reached. He had nothing left to offer this fight except his continued refusal to fall. The city, broken and burning, watched the knight who had stood alone against a prince of the warp. In that shared silence, the cost of survival settled over the battlefield like ash. The demon was dead. Artorias still breathed. But the victory had taken more from him than the wounds on his armor could show, leaving behind a hollow ache that pressed inward, as if the abyss itself leaned its weary head upon his soul. And yet, even in that aching quiet, the war around him had not truly ended. It had only changed shape, waiting for what he would choose to become next. In the days that followed the Daemon Prince's fall, Valyria IX did not know peace, but it knew a reprieve. The Chaos Fleet, shaken by the loss of its champion and the disruption of its warp bindings, began to fracture. Internal rivalries flared, warlords turned against one another in the sudden absence of unified will, and the storm that had shielded them warped into a tangle of unstable corridors. Some vessels fled into the Imperium, others were lost to its currents, their twisted hulls swallowed by roiling disturbances. The bombardment that had threatened to break the hive's spires ceased with hesitant uncertainty. Imperial forces seized their chance. Guard regiments pushed outward from the hive's core, reclaiming streets buried under rubble and ash. Vox channels filled with renewed commands, clearer now that the interference had lessened. Medici units tended to survivors dug out from collapsed precincts and shattered shrines. Tech priests muttered exhausted litanies as they coaxed wounded machines' spirits back into grudging functionality. The world did not heal, but it staggered away from the precipice of annihilation. And through every whispered report, every incomplete log entry, one constant name took hold, though no one knew its true form. The Knight. The one who felled the demon. Stories grew quickly, spreading through underground shelters and mess halls, along ammunition lines and Medici tents. Some said he was a forgotten space Marine chapter champion, cast out for sins or sacrifice. Others claimed he was a living saint sent by the Emperor in their darkest hour. A few, huddled in corners where faith and fear entwined, whispered that he was something older, something that did not belong to the Imperium at all. Inquisitor Vost did not allow herself such luxury. She walked the wounded hive with a measured stride, following the trail of aftermath he left behind. Each location told the same quiet tale: chaos forces shattered under single combat, corrupted entities slain with surgical precision, Imperial lives preserved where extermination would have been easier. Her data slates filled with contradictions, signs of power without warp resonance, corruption without chaos, sorrow without despair. At the center of it all, she found him again. Artorias stood upon a broken balcony overlooking the reclaimed district, his armor still cracked, his posture weary yet upright. The abyss drifted faintly around him, subdued, like a storm that had spent its rage and now lingered as mist. He watched the world below, not as a conqueror, not as a savior, but as a soldier taking measure of a battlefield that refused to rest. The priest stood near him, offering quiet presence rather than words. He understood that some burdens did not need sermons, only recognition. Vost approached with the caution of one addressing a weapon not yet fully sheathed. Her stormtroopers remained at a respectful distance, forming a perimeter that looked more like protection than containment. For the first time since her arrival, she did not view the night primarily as a threat, but as a variable that had already saved more lives than he had endangered. Her instincts, sharpened by years of sifting through lies and heresies, told her something that protocol resisted. The Imperium knighted this warrior. Not as an icon, not as a myth, as a blade. The galaxy stretched beyond Valeria IX in an endless pattern of war and decay. Demon worlds pulsed in the warp. Xenos empires watched from the void. Traitor legions plotted from hidden strongholds. The Imperium, vast and crumbling, teetered between survival and collapse. In such a galaxy, a knight who walked with a different darkness, one that resisted chaos rather than served it, could become more than a curiosity. He could become a fulcrum. Artorias did not know the language of their faith, their bureaucracy, or their politics, but he knew the language of war. He recognized the endless march of enemies, the brittle courage of mortals standing against overwhelming odds, the way hope flickered even in the most forsaken corners of a doomed world. When Vost finally spoke, her words did not come as orders, but as an acknowledgement of reality. She extended not chains, but a path, one that led deeper into the Imperium's heart, into councils and war zones where his presence would tilt the balance in battles yet to come. He understood enough. He had been a knight once in a different land, sworn to protect a realm that fell into a darkness it could not withstand. Now a new realm, vast and wounded, stood before him, facing its own unending abyss. Artorias lifted his gaze toward the distant stars, where the wounds of the warp still glowed like malignant constellations. The abyss rested within him, quieter but never absent, no longer just a curse but a burden he chose to use. The Imperium would write its legends, as it always did. It would call him many things: a lost Primarch, a dark saint, a ghost from a forgotten age. None of those names would change what he truly was. A knight who walked in darkness, so others did not fall into it. And as Valeria IX began the slow work of survival, the galaxy beyond shifted, just slightly, as rumors of a new shadow on the battlefield reached ears both loyal and damned. The age of stagnation did not end that day. But the first stone had moved, and somewhere deep in the quiet places between stars and storms, the Abysswalker took his first steps toward becoming a legend in a galaxy that had never known his name. If you hunger for more tales of impossible encounters. In the dark millennium, smash that subscribe button, and the Emperor protects those who support the channel.